We are here online, the Free Liberal podcast, I suppose, with Professor Dr. Troy Camplin. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
So, this is our first go at this, and I think this topic we're getting at today, getting to the Hayekian network. It's a pretty big idea. I figure we'd just start by finding a little bit more about your background and how you came to write this piece, getting to the Hayekian network, and sort of how it fits into your research program.
All right. Well, I have a very diverse background. I have my PhD is in the humanities. I have a master's degree in English, and I have a bachelor's degree in recombinant gene technology. And I also did 2 years of graduate work in molecular biology before going on into English and humanities. So with that background, I, of course, mostly publish in economics.
Naturally. How is it that, how did your own sort of Hayekian view emerge? Did you, had you been reading a lot of classical liberal literature or libertarian literature? How did you find Hayek?
Well, it's a very complicated, complex sort of way of getting there. I had actually taken an intro to philosophy class as an undergrad with a man by the name of Ronald Nash. And in this class, one of the books that he taught was a book he had written called Poverty and Wealth, A Christian Defense of Capitalism. And it's here that I was first introduced to the idea of free market economics, or economics at all. And I became just utterly fascinated with economics. So I went to the library and read everything in the library on economics, ranging from, Milton Friedman, read a little book called Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, which led me to some novel called Atlas Shrugged. And I also read The Road to Serfdom, read some Walter Williams, and so on and so forth. There are just lots and lots and lots of people.
And this is an undergraduate.
Yes, as an undergrad. And I did all this reading on my own. I decided to take an intro to economics class my senior year, just sort of. I wanted to see, if there were any gaps in my knowledge. After I made a 99.5 on my first test, it sort of became clear I didn't so much have any gaps in my knowledge. I really aced that class. And that was at Western Kentucky University, and with Robert Polzinelli, who I had for economics. And so I was interested in, but at the same time, I guess not interested enough at the time to change gears and go into economics. Instead, I was more interested in creative writing and writing fiction and that sort of stuff. Along those lines, I guess I was influenced by Ayn Rand. It's like, oh, I can take these ideas and I can write fiction. This will be, an interesting way of investigating these ideas. And so I became a libertarian through economics, and it was through economics that I was introduced to Ayn Rand, who then sort of got me interested in more creative writing and in philosophy as well. Ironically, I became interested in philosophy through economics, and then I was interested in economics because of a philosophy course. Convoluted ways of going about things in my brain, anyway. And so so I was introduced to all of these ideas. In addition, I was reading a lot of complexity theory and chaos theory and that sort of stuff, the systems biology, because of my interest in biology as well. And so a lot of this all sort of the free market economics made sense given the stuff that I was reading on complexity and and chaos and that sort of stuff?
I would say in my own learning, spontaneous order was a sort of a late concept in coming in terms of wrapping it up in terms of describing what the market system is like. It was much more rooted in the principles of justice, the principles of individual liberty, and then only later did I understand that there was a invisible hand theory, and that basically the emergent order coming out of these sort of somewhat simple rules was itself an idea compared to conspiracy theory or other kinds of elaborate theory that seek to, or the varieties of theories that seek to explain parts of the world that rely on human action as intention versus an emergent order that. And again, these are somewhat hard to talk about, I think, because they are removed from our ideas of human action or human intention versus patterns of abstraction that like the price system, for instance, in which nobody knows what it's supposed to be like, but yet we all use it. So I guess what I'm trying to get at with that initial question to you is, what do you think are in your paper, you talk about the mind needing a subset of tools that is able to interface with this. So at a minimum, it's an interface. Obviously, we can use it without necessarily having a word or a term, the spontaneous order, to describe it. So again, how do we get to that point? And is it relevant that we have this intellectual idea versus just a practical idea of how to use it?
Well, I mean, that's sort of what science does very often, is it takes us to task on what seems logical and what seems obvious. It seems obvious that the sun goes around the earth. It seems very obvious.
Well, it's from basic observation.
Just from basic observation. And once you get some scientific tools, then you start going, well, maybe we go around the sun. Maybe the earth rotates. There's something else going on. And once you start getting some scientific tools, you begin to see what reality looks like. And then that becomes, oh, well, of course, that makes perfectly good sense. But just from basic observation, there are things that aren't going to make sense. One being, we have this tendency to see order in the world and to associate the creation of order with someone who came along and made the order. So if you were to say, go to Antarctica into the certain fields of rocks, you would come across areas where rocks were in these circles, right? So they're arranged in circles, and they're interlinking circles. And so the first thing that you would think is, well, wow, somebody's been out here before me and arranged all these rocks into circles. How crazy is that? Well, except that it's Antarctica, and so you know that didn't happen because there's nobody there. And so you begin to ask, okay, well, then how did this really, really happen? And they find out that those rocks can organize themselves into rings, with the big rocks on the outside and then increasingly smaller rocks toward the inside. And this is done because there's water in the ground and it freezes and thaws. Freezes during the night, thaws during the day, and this interaction of the rocks and the freezing, thawing water causes the rocks to move in such a way that it creates rings. And this is self-organization. Well, it turns out that rocks aren't the only thing that self-organize. It seems that much of the universe is self-organizing.
The rocks in this story, though, are being moved by physical properties that they hold relative to their external environment. So I assume that you're drawing an analogy to us, where human beings are still driven by cognition and by choices.
Sure.
But in the sense that there are larger things that are drawing us to action and to. I mean, how different is it, and how much does that human element come into play? I mean, we're not just cue balls on a pool table, right?
Well, right, and that's why we don't organize ourselves into just rings. We organize ourselves into very much more complex sorts of things because our interactions are very much more complex. But ultimately, it's just interactions. The rocks are interacting with each other through an intermediary, water. We are interacting with each other through an intermediary, language. And I'm communicating to you through using language, and so you're getting some idea of what my brain is doing, and I'm reforming your brain to some degree because of my language. We're communicating with each other, and we will go off slightly differently organized in a sense. But also communication is, it literally brought us together. We were sitting here talking to each other because we communicated with each other. And so it managed to coordinate our activities so that we have converged onto this spot at this time using certain technology in order to have this conversation.
Okay. Now, of course, though, I want to go back to the sort of the analogy between the water medium and the language medium. In the language medium, I think about Douglas Hofstadter, I Am a Strange Loop, talking about neurons pushing each other around, and the idea that you can language itself. You're creating instruments that that tend to encourage people. You learn rhetoric. You learn how to manipulate other people in order to get them to be more amenable to whatever it is that you'd like to happen, even if you're not necessarily being nefarious or deceptive. To put a pretty face on whatever the proposal is, just for instance.
Right.
But at the same time, though, we're influenced, and again, I think this goes into sort of a Hayekian or maybe a Smithian story of we influence ourselves even. So I say certain things. If I say FML, maybe I'll be more depressed. Or if I say Kevin did a good job today, and I smile at myself on the mirror, maybe I will influence myself to believe that I in fact did a better job than I actually did. And so we do that across this channel using certain language, certain words. I address you as doctor, not just because I believe that is a title that you have, but also it helps win certain favor with you and maybe with the audience also.
Right.
So I mean, how do you see that? What scale? How does this work? And I mean, in the paper you talk a lot about the idea of hierarchical scale. So the idea that there's this, this sort of planning scale where I can organize things on my desk, but it's harder for me to organize the things on everyone's desks, or to organize my whole neighborhood, for instance, into a carnival versus just using the price system to go and shop at the local store. And those are two different kinds of networks. I think that, again, what I'm trying to get at is how is that language fits into this second story, this price system story, versus the planning story. So yet we are all trying to use words. We're all trying to use words in a way that compels people, not compels people, or encourages people to do what we want. But we're still negotiating to some degree for what those words mean.
Well, yeah, and that's why language is itself a spontaneous order. The language is always changing, always evolving. We're always trying to negotiate meaning, and it does help us to coordinate our actions. We're able to obviously coordinate our actions in a much greater way than, say, other social species, lions, for example. And they communicate in a lot of different ways, but language is not one of them. And as a result, they're not able to organize into extremely large groups as we're able to do. And the precision of their communication is not quite as good. And
well, they don't have articulation in the sense they can express disdain. They can growl at each other,
sure.
And they can purr, like a cat can purr, but they can't necessarily negotiate the terms of an agreement. And in some same sense, an opposable thumb enables more articulation of action.
Right.
And of course, with language and the stacking up of language, and again, I think this goes to sort of the point of your paper, that there is no end to the amount of language that you can have. There's a limit to some degree on the time you can take on exploring language.
Right.
But the idea of language itself, language is not finite.
Right. It's very open-ended. It's always changing. And it can undergo, rapid change. And think about the change from, say, Old English through Middle English into Modern English. In that particular case, that was due to the introduction of French, so that we have this, French language built on top of the Anglo-Saxon, which becomes Modern English. And so you can have these rapid transitions for a variety of reasons. But ultimately, it's changing, and we can't dictate how it's going to change. There have been attempts. The French attempted, in parts of the 20th century to make sure that language was properly French and that you didn't have such atrocities as les t-shirts. Well, guess what? They have les t-shirts. That is now a French word, whether they like it.
To bring something closer to home here for Liberal, a project that I've been interested in for a long time, and I know Hayek talked about it, is the revitalization of the word liberal.
Right.
And recently, Professor Dan Klein at George Mason has pushed to at least knock people who aren't very liberty oriented out of the word liberal, people who are socialists and hardcore leftists, so to speak.
Right.
What do you think of the prospects for that kind of project?
Well,
not much, right?
Here's the thing. If you're not expecting much, you probably won't be disappointed. The fact of the matter is that the language has changed. People view liberal as meaning a particular thing. Is it theoretically possible to, to change it, the meaning of the language back? Yes. If you can reach some sort of tipping point in the use of the language, then people will start using it in that particular way. Very rarely, though, do conscious efforts pan out. And it's not necessarily just because they're conscious. It's just, how is it promulgating through the network?
But do you agree with this kind of idea that, obviously we're brushing through these things at a very high level right now. We're not getting really deep into how it all works, and it'll be good for a later dialogue. But this idea that we get feedback out of these language systems into our own thinking, and my concern, one reason I'm a big advocate of pushing for the word liberal, is that I want people who use the word or see the word in context to understand its free liberal, its spontaneous order meanings versus purely a sense of libertineness or just largesse from the state. And I think those are misleading in terms of their definitions. And I think it takes away from the idea of like liberal arts. And the reason I bring this particularly is because I think it connects into I think liberalism is deeply connected to the idea of a Hayekian network. And the Hayekian network itself is liberalism.
Right. Yeah, and the liberal arts are supposed to train us in such a way that we become liberal in the sense of liberated free thinkers, and better able to live in Hayekian networks, that we're better able to negotiate through complex social networks, whether, economy, and understand.
So we're not just growling at each other, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, helping us to sort of see the beauty and the complexity of the world and of humanity itself.
In terms of, so there's here's it is working at several different levels. One, we have this kind of theoretical idea of the spontaneous order. We have some rules. What are the basic rules? Are there rules, or are the rules themselves a part of the conversation? Are there givens, so to speak? Do we need? I mean, I know in the economic sense we talk about property rights. We talk about rules of justice. In political systems, we talk about who has the authority to make rules. In the United States, obviously, the federal government in Washington D.C. is the ultimate arbiter of many things. But what is it that what are the essential elements of a Hayekian order?
Well, one of the things that emerges within any sort of self-organizing network process, spontaneous order, is rules. Rules themselves are one of the things that emerge. Different forms of organization emerge. So what you find is that now there are of course certain sort of underlying rules, but they're rules in a sort of a loose sense. You have these sort of paradoxical relationships that underlie spontaneous orders, order and chaos coexisting simultaneously, attraction and repulsion existing simultaneously, negative feedback and positive feedback coexisting simultaneously. And so you have these sorts of things that are underlying all of the spontaneous orders.
Do you have a list on hand of your all the spontaneous orders you can think of right now?
Let's see. One, free market economy, a free money banking system would be a spontaneous order. Technological innovation is a spontaneous order. Science is a spontaneous order. Math as a social activity is a spontaneous order.
Well, math is really it's a language, though. I mean, so in science to some degree also it's a set of symbols. Mm-hmm. How we use the symbols, how the symbols are enabled to change in the grammar of that language. But I think prices are really interesting, and the economy is really interesting because there's not really collective agreement on how they work. Whereas math and language and grammar, there is more agreement, and there are people to some degree to defining how it works. But how does it come about? Like, how does it? I mean, do you have a literature that you've studied that describes the origins of these things, or I mean, it's not planned, so it's not as though a story someone made it. It's just people were doing this, and then someone later came along and said, "Oh, look what they're doing."
Well, yes, and that's exactly what happens with any of these spontaneous orders. Nobody's planning these things. Nobody's going, "Oh, do you know what we need? We need a social system where a bunch of people are investigating knowledge simultaneously."
It's a great idea.
That's a fantastic idea. Let's do that. It's just, people are like, "Oh, this looks interesting. I think I'll investigate it." And of course, there are some, cultural changes that, make those sorts of things maybe more or less possible, as the case may be. If you don't have to worry about whether or not the church is going to kill you for investigating something, you might be more inclined to do so. And so, there are going to be social changes that will open up a spontaneous order more than others. So we identify sort of modern science as a fairly recent phenomenon, coming about, in the wake of the Renaissance. That doesn't mean that science didn't exist before.
Well, what's the effect of the explicit recognition of these systems versus a traditional society or a more religious society or a more tribal society that uses these tools, but they don't necessarily know what they are. They haven't read Adam Smith. They haven't read Darwin. They haven't read Troy Camplin, for instance. So, what does it help us make the case when we can point to, say, the first chapter of Anarchy, State, and Utopia, and say, well, look, it distinguishes between these two kinds of systems. Does that help people understand that this is does it incline people to want to support the idea of the free order, or are people still mostly constrained by like lower level ideas that dominate their thinking? I mean, does the higher level idea motivate people to be more free liberal?
Well, think about it this way. Here in the United States, there's still controversy about Darwin's theory of evolution. There's a very huge constituency who believe in creationism, who believe in top-down organization of life and the universe. You have some sort of in-between people, your intelligent designers, who, oh yeah, Big Bang, but God comes along periodically and has to fix things. So you have your sort of central planner God, or you have your interventionist God, or with the Darwin's theory, you have self-organization. Now, obviously, in much of the world, Darwin's theory has gradually won out. In some places, like the United States, the battle is ongoing. One can say the same for many other spontaneous orders. I think one of the benefits of looking at a wide variety of spontaneous orders, like language, for example, almost no one makes the mistake of thinking that somebody came along and invented language and imposed it upon us. If somebody came along and said that, you'd be like, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous on the face of it. And yet when somebody says, oh, well, we can do that with the economy, nobody thinks that that's ridiculous on the face of it, even though they're identical kinds of structures from a structural standpoint.
No, I totally agree with you on that respect in terms of people's unwillingness to believe there's I think, though, it gets wrapped up in this idea of morality and again, the idea of morality itself is what's coming head to head with the spontaneous order of biology, the evolution theory, and the idea it seems to people are concerned that it takes away this sort of originating element that gives the values that we ought to have. I follow a lot of what Dan Klein has done in terms of talking about the band theory, that before the tribe there's the band, these guys hanging out in the woods together, and that our evolutionary adaptation is towards that environment, and such that our instincts and our reasoning is really more fitted to understanding the distribution and allocation of resources in that environment, and we're kind of bewildered in the extended order in the enormously abstract global world that we live in today, with Google Hangouts and all.
Right.
So, but I suppose my question is, what are the if we're going to delve into that aspect, and we don't have too many more minutes here, but you wanted to answer one last question about how do we what is the system of morals that emerges in a spontaneous order, and how does it correspond to the more traditional orders of yesteryear?
Well, if morality is itself a spontaneous order, and I think it is, then there is no answer to that because one cannot
Well,
discern.
thanks for nothing, Dr. Camplin.
one cannot determine what the outcome is going to be because it's not a goal-oriented system.
But you agree that there is a historical path that, and certainly Christianity and liberalism have to some degree co-evolved, and we've arrived in modern liberal America. To what degree do we rest? What precedents are we resting upon to build our higher level orders? I think certainly to get to an idea of spontaneous order, you already mentioned the idea of openness and non-persecution from the church. What are the constituent elements of being able to even get to that point?
Well, now while I did say that one cannot predict the outcome of sort of where is morality going, one can't. That doesn't mean that one cannot say things about
sort
of patterns that one can see. So that, for example, certainly societies have grown more complex over time. The United States today is a more complex society than medieval Europe.
Well, it was more complex than the United States was 200 years ago.
Yeah, and so the fact of the matter is that as societies grow more complex, then our moralities, our moral systems, our values, and various other things also change with it. Our psychologies change in relation to the increasing complexities of society. And so one of the things that happens is that when you have much more complex societies, you sort of psychologically become open to more and more possibilities. You become more cosmopolitan in your thinking. Christianity actually allowed for the unification of a great many, essentially tribes across Europe. And they had sort of a unified way of viewing the world. That didn't mean that.
Well, if nothing else, it's a possibility of unified identity across nations.
Yeah, and so you have these your French and your Germans and your Italians and so on and so forth, all sort of saw each other as fellow Christians, and they may have still also had their own individual identities and local identities and national identities, but they also had this Christian identity that helped to sort of make them more, at least sort of locally cosmopolitan in the sense of fellow Christians. As we get even more complex societies, liberal societies, then we begin to include other religions, other ways of thinking, other worldviews, and go, well, have to have sort of a live and let live way of doing things. But ultimately, everybody has to agree on
that organizational pattern is required. For instance, today in the liberal West versus, say, the theological Middle East. Are we able to live and let live in that environment, or do we need to have as a sort of coordinating element? Do we need everyone to sort of agree to live and let live in order to facilitate? Do we need to all say, "Hey, we're all liberals"? Like it used to be, we're all Christians, or we're all this, or we're all Germans, or we're all that way. We're all Americans in the 20th century. In the 21st century, do we need to say we're all liberals?
Actually, yes. For example, the Russian word "mir," which is we translate as peace, also means domination. There's a certain insight to that.
Okay.
A Christian peace means a Christian domination. And a liberal peace means liberal domination. Yes, you may believe whatever you believe, but you also have to allow others to believe what they believe. Well, once you do that, you have to believe in liberalism. That you have to then put liberalism above your religious beliefs.
So liberalism has to be the top of the totem pole, basically.
Yeah.
And insofar as that there is competition yet for that top position, are we not seeing a conflict of cultures? I mean, what is the is there is there enough room? I guess that's my question is how much space is there inside of liberalism for, say, Christianity, and more extremely for Sharia law Islam? Can these ideas live in the same space?
Um, yes and no, in the sense of if people want to come and you know, if people who are interested in having Sharia law in the United States decide that they all want to move to some county here in Texas and gain a Democratic majority and vote in Sharia law, and people are free to move in or move out as they wish, and they're not going to kill you if you decide that this Sharia law isn't for me. I'm out of here. Then in that sense, it can coexist. But at the same time, obviously, then they have to abide by a very liberal idea of freedom of exit, freedom of entrance and exit, freedom of speech. That I can say that I don't believe in this. I believe this is wrong, and ultimately, if this isn't working out for me, I can get out of the county, and you're not going to prevent me from doing so. You can have all the Sharia law you want, so long as you're not violating that ability to come and go as you please.
My friend Robert Capozzi, formerly the Free Liberal, he used to talk about the idea of anarchy pods, and you can have your anarchy on your property, but you can't leave your property. I think that's the puzzle, though, is it seems like liberalism is all pervasive, and the current issue with the recognition of gay marriage, clearly it's now pushed across state borders, and it seems to be going into even businesses, and we're basically that the expectation of the majority or the increasing majority today is that, well, if you don't, it's sort of like 40 years ago, if you don't like the fact that we're going to integrate racially, well, that's too bad for you, because that's what we liberals think you should do. And I believe that you should respect and treat people equally. I do wonder what if there isn't some kind of zero-sum game where we increase freedom for some and reduce freedom for others, and what that actually means in liberalism. Because I like the idea of liberalism being continuously opening more doors, but I think it's very clear that liberalism shuts some doors, and maybe those doors should be shut.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, ultimately, even if if Sharia law basically means that convert or die, well, too bad for Sharia law.
Yeah.
But
it's a shame. It's a real shame.
Yeah, but if it means but if it can mean you are allowed that you are allowed to come and go as you please while you're here. This is the law. You should abide by the law while you're here, and if you don't like it, you can leave, and you're free to leave.
Respect the house rules, basically.
Yeah, respect the house rules. I've rules in my home. Rules in in my yard.
Take your shoes off. Don't curse in front of the kids.
Yeah.
Don't be a drunken jerk.
Yeah, and if you don't like it, leave.
Sure. And in my home, it's the opposite of all of those things.
My dad always used to say, make yourself at home or go home. There's a certain liberalism to that, right?
No, certainly, and well, again, I grew up in Europe, and I don't know, I was talking with some folks here yesterday at the local pub. The idea that in Europe at a beer garden or whatever, you have some extra seats at your table. You go and you sit down, and you sort of respect the equal space, and you're friendly. In the United States, it's much more proprietarian. In general, in the United States, we're much less engaged in sort of community activities. I'm not to say there is none, but it's just that it's definitely less than in Europe, where there's a real political impulse towards creating shared spaces and respecting those shared spaces.
Right. Yeah, and, you know,
and I don't know. I don't have a theory about how that changes behavior. Other than that, I think that broadly, Europe is liberal and broadly America is liberal. Although there are cultural differences, and I guess I am interested to some degree when the margins are narrower, which system is better? Which system has better adaptive efficiencies? Which system reduces friction the most, and which system is more robust? And of course, those things are not necessarily knowable until, especially the last one, until the cataclysm happens and Oregon sinks into the sea or whatever it is, that horrible thing that happens, or Putin invades Russia. We won't know.
Right. Well, and ultimately,
Europe, not Russia. He's already in Russia.
Yeah. But ultimately, of course, we can't know, and that's why it's important to sort of have the freedom to experiment and to try different things. Different cultures are going to have different effects on different orders. Different kinds of liberalism are going to emerge based upon different cultures. Now, there will be, different spontaneous orders will be more important in others in one than in another. And all of those will contribute to different kinds of civil societies overall. And that's not a bad thing overall. I think that's good,
But I think that's part of the understanding of the spontaneous order. It becomes this thing where your part of your liberalism is not the doing just of it, but it's also the accepting of the potentially different realities that can emerge, and that's what gives it its freedom element. Is that people are somewhat indeterminate, which is why the theological based society or purely traditional society has a lot more trouble with accepting those new realities, because there's this prior suggestion or prior idea that what things ought to be versus having a becoming of the world.
Right, and again, that comes out of our goal orientedness and our sort of insistence that sort of things have a goal, and we're always trying to make the world more like the way that we want it. That's sort of part and parcel of human nature. It's what drives innovation. It's what drives entrepreneurship, and those are all wonderful, good things. And they are appropriate at their level. But it's another thing to then go, well, now let's apply that to a group of systems that cannot be submitted to a goal, cannot be made goal oriented without collapsing it, without crushing it.
I guess this is that's the last question before we sign off. How does that openness relate to sort of libertarian rules about non-coercion? So I'm not allowed to. I can order all the pens and pencils on my desk can be ordered according to color and size and lined up in my way I want, but I can't go to your house and threaten you and say, I need you to do the same thing I've just done, because that's what we're doing now.
Well, we can use language again as an example. Would it occur to anyone at all, to go, I hate the word ain't so much that every time that I hear somebody say it, I'm going to punch them in the face?
Wait, what's the word ain't?
Really, this person's crazy. This person's insane. It's like, no, this is very important. We need to change the world. We need to get rid of the word ain't. I'm going to construct the world the way that I want to. Nobody would think that was in any way, shape, or form sane. We would say that that's just the epitome of insanity.
Well, the thing is, we have swearing laws. I believe in Virginia here, you can get a $200 fine up in Arlington County you go have a couple of beers down at Clarendon, and you go out in the street and you drop the F-bomb, which I know I've been accustomed to do. Then suddenly you get a $300 fine. That's coercion. That's force. Is it making our coordination better? I don't really believe that, but it's an interesting problem they're trying to solve.
Well, I mean, sort of what is the problem? The problem is, here are some words that we have almost entirely arbitrarily decided are bad.
Right.
Based on what? It's like the word shit and the word crap refer to the same thing.
Please, this is a family podcast. This is a family podcast, Troy.
It's but the point is that there's an arbitrary designation here. Crap is worse than poop. Why?
That's an interesting question, and we'll have to save that for we'll have to do a whole hour on crap versus poop at some point.
But so the point is that
we discussed the presidential candidates also that podcast. But that's a joke. That's for our people who are on the spectrum. That's a joke. Sorry, that's not politically correct. I apologize. But Professor Camplin, really appreciate you being with us today and sitting through all the technical difficulties and all the problems getting to the Hayekian network. But I think we've come to the edge of it at least, and perhaps we'll get further into it in the next iteration.
Yeah, so we demonstrated the difficulty of coordination of just two people.
Well, when they're doing me, I mean, it's more difficult. But no, but hey, it's a real pleasure, and I enjoyed. We'll put a link to your paper, and or at least to the JSTOR link to it. Do you have a blog or anything, any other related materials that we can link to on this subject, or we should put those in the show notes?
Well, I have quite a few articles that are published. If you go to my blog, Interdisciplinary World,
okay,
which is
what's the URL for that?
That's zatavu.blogspot.com, zatavu.blogspot.com. You will find along the right-hand side a group of links to my various and sundry publications. Popular publications to academic publications. So it's sort of fairly easy to get my stuff, unless they're, in books that you have to pay, over $100 for or something.
Well, and for anyone's listening, I want to make a point that I follow Troy on Twitter and Facebook, and I see he puts up a lot of stuff every day, and at least a third of it is interesting to me. But no, actually, it's all very interesting. It's often too much for me to process. But Troy is definitely an interdisciplinary thinker, and it's a real joy an honor to get to chat about these issues. And again, I look forward to going more in depth in the future.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks.